Hello, my friends, and welcome to another episode of Ending Physician Overwhelm. We are getting dangerously close to episode 200. Hard to believe, but here we are. And today, if you are seeing any of this, you can see that I am recording in my car. I like to challenge my own notions of perfectionism and doing everything just so every so often, and this is just what we're doing today. Before we dive into today's conversation, which I'm going to be teasing apart the struggle between cynicism and clear-eyed realism. Before we jump in, though, we're going to give ourselves permission to acknowledge that things are extremely challenging in healthcare at this moment in time. I'm recording this in early October 2025. If you are in the United States, you know that we've been seeing ongoing, kind of active harm to long-established vaccine science that is being, perpetrated by top levels of government. We've also got just incredibly odd and damaging misinformation coming from the government, including from the president recently having a very weird press announcement related to Tylenol and autism. We've also got the typical but worse than usual challenges through our insurance-based healthcare system with ongoing declining reimbursements, which continues to affect staffing levels, both including, the physicians and the clinicians who provide the care, but also all of the support staff. These things are real, and these things cause direct challenge in our day-to-day, and we are not going to gaslight ourselves into thinking that we should just feel happy and, blasé about it. We are not going to try and change our thoughts about those things being difficult. What we are going to do is we are going to talk about how do we not get stuck in our cynicism? How do we not blame and shame ourselves for being cynical in the first place? How do we take care of ourselves in this challenging time? Of course, this is not the first time that we've run into these issues, and I'm sure it won't be the last, but the ongoing work for the humans who are here listening to me speak is how do we take care of ourselves? How do we make decisions for ourselves? How do we choose to show up in these times that are so incredibly difficult and still be full humans, still acknowledge our humanity, still take care of ourselves and the people that we love? So let's jump in. So the first thing that I want to highlight is that cynicism is a protective mechanism. It does come from someplace. It's just that it's a problem because it backfires on us. So let's think about what cynicism is. Cynicism is a normal response of the brain to repeated disappointments, right? Cynicism tells us that, if I don't expect anything, if just, acknowledge that everything is just going to continue to be as bad as I think it's going to be, I can't be hurt. I can't be disappointed anymore. I don't have to be emotionally vulnerable and experience discomfort. Unfortunately, of course, that's not true, but it's really important that as we talk about cynicism, if we notice that we are feeling cynical, that we acknowledge that it comes from a very real place. And those of us who are people pleasers, will really feel this pretty intensely a lot of the time, right? Because even though we can see it as a normal response to not having, our expectations met, not having our requests met, we really struggle because we have this inability to be able to make everyone else happy. And cynicism feels like an extra layer of hard on top of the feelings that we get from not being able to meet everyone's needs. So I want to acknowledge that if you struggle with people pleasing, cynicism feels extra bad because it feels much more like failure. And we can get really stuck in blaming ourselves for having what is a normal response. Now, it being a normal response doesn't mean that it's a helpful response, doesn't mean that we need to stay with it. But I just want us to acknowledge that if we struggle with feeling cynical, doesn't mean that we're a bad person, right? It is a coping strategy that has been trying to help us avoid hurt. It's just that it doesn't work all that well, right? We can think of it as, kind of a band-aid, but it doesn't work well when really the skin needs to be closed together, right? We've got a gaping, that got a little graphic and weird, but there we go. So we'll see it as a protective mechanism, right? We will see it as something that backfires and that is a natural consequence of repeated disappointments, right? If I expect nothing, then I can't be hurt. But of course, that's not true. So what are the impacts of cynicism? When we are stuck in cynicism, we become very passive. We just assume that everything will remain bad and we don't engage. We don't do anything about it, right? We don't speak up. We don't advocate for change. We don't offer a counter narrative, and we don't really protect ourselves. We just assume that things are going to be bad, stay bad. Everybody sucks. We hate everything, right? It is just a negative framework. So it's a normal response, but it's not a terribly helpful one. The other thing, of course, that is harmful about cynicism is that it infects everyone around us, right? When we are very cynical, other people absorb that as well. You can think about scenarios, and I can think about this quite painfully, where you have, say, a new medical assistant who comes in. They're very positive, they're very optimistic, they try and work hard, and very quickly the culture of, the other MAs or of everybody in the facility sometimes will just turn them into this more cynical, sort of hardened person, right? It comes from a normal place if we think about human psychology, but it is infectious and contagious in a way that does not help. So we can think of it as something that makes sense, but not something that we want to hang on to. And it's really important that we, again, not blame ourselves for it, but just acknowledge that this is a normal response to some of the things that we experience. So if we're thinking about this for ourselves, right, how do we put that in the context of thinking about the challenges that we are experiencing currently, right? Cynicism would have us say that the system is broken and there's nothing I can do about it. Nothing matters. Instead, we want to start shifting the dialogue, right, and acknowledging the system is broken, but I do choose how I respond. I do choose how I show up. I do choose what I do and don't do. And we're going to dive into more examples of that as we go along. So the next point that I want to get to is that clear-eyed realism doesn't stick its head in the sand. It doesn't get stuck in cynicism. And it decides, what am I capable of doing? What can I do? What can I not do in response to difficult circumstances? So we think about medical misinformation, right? And you might have patients coming in and they are confused, or they are very clear that they believe that whatever misinformation is true. We are going to need to decide and acknowledge that we are not going to undo all of the misinformation. Now, that doesn't mean that we never have discussions, but and I know that there are some hearts and minds that we will not change. We're going to have to decide when to engage in those conversations and when to not engage. And I know, right, that some people are very, let's just say, we'll pick vaccines for now. They're very anti-vaccine. If you are going to choose to continue to care for them in your clinic, assuming that you don't have a choice or that you don't choose to exclude people from your clinic who choose to not have vaccines, you are going to need to decide for yourself, how and when do I engage in this conversation and to what extent, right? So there's going to need to be some healthy boundaries put in place, right? You're going to have to decide how often or you do or don't counter medical misinformation. Now, this is going to be different depending on what setting that you're working in, right? It is okay for you to have your well-informed and experienced opinion. It is okay. It is okay to have a very clear stance, and it is okay to not get stuck in a heated argument with patients, right? That is not generally going to help. We are not generally going to positively influence those who are very strongly against whatever the thing is that we're talking about. Now, Where do we have influence? We do have influence on people who are asking legitimate questions, who, are unclear, who are hearing different pieces of information from people that they trust, right? We can choose to be an engaged voice who speaks up in that moment, right? The mom who is struggling because her family members are telling her that vaccines are going to harm her baby. She isn't sure, and she wants to know. Right, you can have an engaged conversation with her. You can give her medical facts, and you can decide that I am going to be a trusted place of information, but I am not going to strong arm anyone. I am not going to spin out. I'm not going to, engage with the hardest arguing people. I'm going to have some healthy limits and boundaries here. Okay. When we are short-staffed, right, which is something that we've been experiencing since before the pandemic, but really just seems to have only gotten worse, right? When we are short-staffed, we are going to need to decide what we are and are not able to do, right? The whole point of having additional humans help us to take care of the patients is that no one person can do all of the things that we are expected to do on our own, right? There is a big difference in what you can accomplish when you are the person who is walking the patient back, checking the vitals, reviewing the medications, right? Finding out what's on the patient's agenda, giving the vaccines, doing all the documentation, doing all the paperwork, right? When you are doing those things, it takes more time than if you have helpers doing those things, right? I know that very acutely because in my clinic, I am all those roles. Now, I have more time with my patients, but I still have to set some limits in order to get all of that done. If I had, staff that helped me with some of those things, right, that would save me time. I would need to see more people. It is a difference, though, when we are working in a healthcare system that is set up with appointments expecting that we will have enough staff to be supporting the physicians and the nurse practitioners and the PA, whoever the billing providers are, right? When we have adequate staff to do the non-clinician roles there, we can see more people. When we do not have the staff that we are supposed to have in those spots, and we are the ones who are doing all of those other tasks that I mentioned that are a part of modern medicine, something has to give. Now, no one is going to give you permission to do less in the visit, but the reality is that you do not magically have more time, and you are going to have to set some healthy limits. If your employer says, well, we still need to, address all the patient's concerns, and we still need to, provide all the preventative care, we're going to have a very real conversation about what help is available, because it is just not possible for you to do all of those things and to provide safe, adequate medical care, right? So if you are short-staffed, clear-eyed realism doesn't throw up its hands and say, there's nothing I can do. Clear-eyed realism will say, I'm going to need to set some boundaries. I'm going to need to choose to do less because I do not have adequate help in order to be able to do what I am expected to do. Now, we've talked about this before as well. Sometimes that will be spoken explicitly, right? Sometimes you will need to say to other people, if I do not have a medical assistant working with me, I am not going to be able to address X, Y, or Z task that I'm asked to do. Sometimes, though, it is going to be something that is not spoken explicitly. It is going to need to be something that you have decided for yourself, something that you choose to set a boundary around, and it can be discussed if it comes up. This is a really tricky area for a lot of people, right? Because we are so conditioned to seek permission to do things and to work within a hierarchy, right? If you're primary care and you struggle with people pleasing and perfectionism, I can guarantee you this is a part of, kind of the struggles that we have, because we are asked to do so many, 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 many things, right? Keep up on all the preventative care. Screen for this, screen for that, click these boxes here, right? And we get told things like, well, it's only an extra 5 clicks. Well, you need to do this thing. And by the way, we don't have staff helping you. We are asked to do impossible things in primary care. I'm sure that this exists in the specialty world. I'm speaking completely from my own experience here. We are going to need to be just fine with B- work for some of these things. I would advocate, and I think you would agree with me, that we are not going to compromise patient safety, right? If the patient in front of me is talking to me about chest pain, you can 100% bet that I have zero interest in getting them caught up on their pap smear, right? If I only have a limited amount of time and I don't have support staff, chest pain is perhaps not the right example. We're going to focus all of our energy on doing what we need to do for the explicit problem that we're facing, and we're not adding anything extra into that situation, right? We need to be able to make decisions. Clear-eyed realism really helps us do that without falling into cynicism, right? There is a difference there. So we have to decide what we're going to do. We have to decide to let go of that perfectionist idealism, right, that tells us that we should be able to do all of the things. And I want you to really let's sit with that example for just a minute, right? The patient is coming in for their wellness visit, right? They're due for a pap smear, they're due for some vaccines, right? But you have a 15-minute appointment and they burst into tears and tell you that they've been struggling with chest pain and shortness of breath, right? You are not going to proceed, my guess, with that wellness exam, right? You are going to proceed with evaluating the concerns that they bring, right? And that's not going to jive right with your numbers, right? Everything is going to be weird and awkward, but you're going to do the right care. You are going to acknowledge the limitations that you have in terms of the time. You're not going to try and cram it all in. We cannot continue to think that I need to be able to do this all, and I need to be able to do it without help, and I need to be able to do it reasonably and perfectly. If we really think about that example, right, and stupid things like, I should say stupid things like this happen in primary care all the time, right? Patient is on your schedule for wellness visit. All they are really thinking about is, I am going to the doctor. I'm going to be able to tell the doctor what's going on. I don't need to schedule anything else. And yet, are we going to put that woman who's crying and who's really worried about her chest pain and her shortness of breath, are we going to do a pelvic exam on her? Is that the right thing? Does that feel good? And she says, but I'm really worried about this other thing. And you're like, yes, but let's scoot your bottom down. It's time for your pelvic exam. No, we're not going to do that, right? We are going to meet the situation where we are. We are going to do what's appropriate to do. And we're going to drop the expectation that we should be able to do it all. As perfectionists, wherever you are in your recovery or not, right, we will struggle with not being able to do everything just so. We will struggle with doing less than we are, fully capable of doing. We will struggle with other people's expectations and our own expectations for our performance, right? But we cannot make up for the shortcomings in the system, right? So cynicism, again, tells us the system's broken. There's nothing we can do, right? We just have to do all the things that we are asked to do, suck it up and move on, right? Clear-eyed realism says the system is broken. There are unrealistic expectations about what can and can't be done, but I am going to be very clear on what is my role. What am I able to do and not do with the resources that I have? What is right for this patient right now? How can I best help to address the most important thing here? And acknowledge that it's going to feel messy and incomplete. And that's just what we're going to need to do, right? There is a difference there, and it is an important difference. So let's think about the next step, which is that you need to decide where your energy goes. So again, cynicism would have us believe that we just need to keep going and that we should just do everything and that everything is equally as important as everything else. And that will not help us, right? You will need to decide what is worth your energy and what is not. And you will need to prioritize for yourself because, again, the system and all of the challenges that are going on right now will require that. it will require you being able to say, this is what we can do, and this is what we can't do, right? When we think about how this, comes up for us, if you think about where you are, we talked about energy management before, right? We think about what energy you do and don't have with whatever is going on in your life, right? You will not have energy to debate every patient who comes in and tells you that they think, that vaccines are a hoax or that they are terrible, right? You're going to need to decide, when am I going to engage in those conversations and when am I not? You are going to hear things from your administration, right? Hear demands on your time, your energy, your expertise, and you're not going to agree with all of those things. You are going to need to decide when to engage in conversations, when you are not going to engage in conversations, and what you will and won't do in response to that. Not all of the things that we are going to be asked to do are going to be reasonable. Not all of them are going to fit your values, and you're going to need to decide, what will I do in response to that, right? For some people, that is going to be leaving a job, right? But for other people, it's going to be deciding, what do I bring and what do I not bring here? These are hard conversations, right? But we are not wrong for deciding for ourselves what we can and can't do, what we need in order to be able to continue the practice of medicine, what we need to be able to take care of ourselves and to spend time with people that we love, right? Each of us have some very real challenges in front of us. And I don't know about you. I know that for myself, when I find myself wallowing in cynicism, when I find myself doom scrolling, when I find myself just hating everyone and everything, and yeah, I do go there sometimes, right? I'm human. We have to figure out, all right, is this what I want to stay in? Is this who I want to be? Is this how I want to show up in the world? Right? And when we can acknowledge, no, this is not me. This is not who I am. This is not how I want to meet this moment, right? Then we need to figure out what we will do. For many of us, we might think optimism or pessimism, right? That we're all one way or all the other way. And that's not very realistic here either, right? There are some very difficult things going on in the world right now. There are some very difficult things going on in the US and all the other places in the world. They are not all the same things, but they are all very challenging, right? Take out, kind of that big picture, right? There are challenging things within medicine that, have been challenging for quite some time and are just continuing to ramp up as difficulties, right? Challenges in our insurance system. We have also got whatever is going on in our personal life, right? You may have a child who's struggling with an illness. You may have, loved ones who are, I don't know, going through something difficult. You may be going through something medically difficult or, relationship challenges, right? There are many, many things that happen in our individual lives, let alone the big picture. And we are going to need to figure out, how do I take care of myself in those moments, right? When we are struggling with illness in ourselves or our family members, the way that we are able to give our energy into our work is going to be different. Do we want to judge and blame ourselves and fall into cynicism when that happens? No, but what we are going to need to do to take care of ourselves in those moments is going to be different. We are going to need to have strong boundaries. We're going to need to practice, using those boundaries and acknowledging that we can't do all of the things that people ask us to do. We are very good problem solvers. We can't solve all of these challenges that are going on in the world right now. We are, people pleasers who really want to help. We're not going to be able to address all of the concerns that every patient brings every time. We just can't do it. We are not going to be able to meet every metric when we don't have the staff and resources to do the normal things that should be happening from the staff who support us, right? There are many challenges here. You are not alone. You are not broken. You are not lazy or inefficient, right? There are very real challenges going on. So if you find yourself feeling like nothing's getting any better and there's something wrong with me and I should be able to do more, or, the system is broken and I'm powerless to stop it, we have to pause. We have to shake it off. We have to do a little bit of this work so that we can say the system is very broken. There are some very real challenges here, and I'm going to remain mindful of what my resources are, what my energy is, and think about, where do I need to have healthy boundaries? What ideas do I need to let go of? My perfectionist ideal of how the visits and the days should go needs to be somewhat different, right? Because we're just not able to do what we've been able to do in the past, or care for patients in the way that we have wanted to. None of this has to be a condonement of what happens, but it should be an acknowledgement of how things are in the bigger world, in medicine, in you and your life. How will you take care of yourself? How will you choose to start practicing boundaries, even though that is uncomfortable work? How will you choose to allow yourself to disappoint people who are used to expecting a lot from you without taking it personally, right? You aren't not doing all of the things because you don't want to help. You aren't doing all of the things that every patient wants or that your administration wants because you are just one person and you don't have adequate resources, right? It is not the way that you want things to be either, but it may be the thing that you need to do right now because of the limitations that we have. So let's just, kind of walk back and sort of think about these 3 points, right? We've got cynicism is a protective mechanism that backfires, and we don't want to get stuck in that energy. Clear-eyed realism doesn't stick its head in the sand, right? Acknowledges that these challenges are going on and allows us the opportunity to reflect on how we will and won't show up, what we can and can't do in response to these circumstances that we face. And finally, is that we have a responsibility to decide where our energy goes. There are many fires right now. We are not going to be able to put them all out. We are not going to be able to tackle all of them. We're going to need to decide, what am I going to choose to do to take care of myself? What am I going to choose to do differently in order to set healthy boundaries and be able to function within this broken healthcare system? How will we choose to show up? And if we can think, what happens to our days when we do this? We are going to have some discomfort, right, of wanting to do things differently. But just imagine if you are able to continue to show up, if you are able to continue to still practice medicine, if you choose to do so, if you are able to still take good care of your body, right, and be able to stay in the fight, right? These things make a very real difference. Now, as we have discussed before, some of us will decide to leave medicine at different points, and I don't think that that's wrong. But we should like the reasons why we choose to do that and not, use that as a response to, it was just so bad and I just couldn't imagine anything getting better. It's okay to want things to be better. It is okay to figure out what you need to do to make it better for yourself, right? But if you want to be able to practice medicine, I encourage us to find ways that we are able to do it, ways that might not feel like your ideal, but allow you to do what you need to do to take care of yourself, because you are a precious commodity. You are important. We are so used to being treated like we are not important as human beings, and we just can't do that anymore, right? The person who constantly feels like they are not enough, not enough, not enough, facing these ongoing challenges eventually starts to drown. They start to drown in cynicism, in overwhelm, in burnout, right? And eventually something happens that takes them out. We don't want that to happen. We don't want that to happen to us as human beings. We don't want that to be the trajectory for people in medicine, right? But we're going to need to choose as individuals to do things differently. Now, we can do that in connection, right? We can do that in spaces like this where we can show up, where we can acknowledge the difficulties, where we can talk openly about the challenges that we face, right? That is something that we do in coaching. That is something that we do in groups where we can come together and honestly share the struggles that we experience. We shouldn't stay in silos and be on our own with this. But let's acknowledge that there are not enough spaces, where these kinds of conversations can happen. So if you find that you have been alone, if you find that you've been struggling with some of these things and feeling like you're broken, like you don't have the resources to step up in these challenging times, I want you to know that you're not alone. I want you to know that this is not a crisis of you or your inadequacy, right? This is very much a situation where we are increasingly tapped out in terms of resources, where we are increasingly asked to do more, where the broken insurance model is very much struggling to adequately balance out the competing pressures, right? Having a for-profit insurance industry in these times is not working terribly well. That is more of a tangent that I want to get onto. Let's just acknowledge that this is not individual failure. And if we are going to stay in the game, we are each of us going to need to decide, how will I take care of myself? How will I show up in these challenges? How can I acknowledge that the systems are very broken, kind of across the board in terms of medicine, but also in the environment that I'm working with? And how will I choose to set boundaries and take care of myself as we navigate that system? All right, my friends, that is what I have for you today. I hope that this helps to give you some ideas. I hope that this helps to combat cynicism without feeling like we have to become Pollyanna-ish. There are some very real challenges going on, and none of us is alone. And I don't want us to feel that we are alone. So if you need some support, you know where to find me. You can reach out to me at my website, which is www.healthierforgood.com, or email me, Megan, MEGAN, @healthierforgood.com. I'd love to hear from you. Until next week, take care.